Hi, I'm Norm Abram. Welcome to the new Yankee Workshop. When was the last time you priced out custom window treatments for your home? Whether it be fabric for draperies or curtains, or how about wood, as in custom interior wood shutters? They can be expensive. Now recently, this old house turned one of its projects into a designer show house, and in the library there were some really attractive shutters, and I thought, why can't we make those? So let's go over to the show house because it's still open and check out those shutters, and then we'll come back here and see if we can build our own version of the Plantation Shutter. For the 25th anniversary of this old house, we bought this 1849 Greek Revival farmhouse. It was a mess, but thanks to the work of Tom Silva and all his craftsmen, it was completely renovated, and then it was turned over to a team of designers who worked on the individual spaces. And that's what you're looking at now. It was a designer show house. While it was open, hundreds of loyal fans and viewers came through to take a look. Now, one of my favorite rooms is this one right here, in the front of the Greek Revival section. It's a library. It was done by the designer Charles Spada, and he had some nice details. Glass enclosed bookcases, nice open bookcases on the front wall. But I'm here today to show you these shutters. Now, these shutters look great in the library, but they would also be good in a bathroom or a bedroom. If we take a closer look, they're nicely made. From the outside, a nice clean look. From the inside, you can control the amount of light that comes through with this control bar. And I like the fact that they rabbited the middle so that they would overlap when they were closed. And some nice hardware was used. Now, if you like these, that's great. But I got to tell you, they're very expensive. Custom made to each window. Now, one way to beat the cost of these is to learn how to make them. And that's what we're going to do today in the new Yankee Workshop. Well, here's my first set of Plantation shutters. And just like the ones at the This Old House show house, we have operable slats. This is what they'll look like on the inside. This is what they'll look like from the outside. I think they turned out pretty well. Now, this is a project all about jigs to accurately cut the pieces and drill the holes. And there are several. Here's one. This will be used to mortise for the hinges. Here's another one that will be used to cut the recess for the control bar. There are two stapling jigs. One to drive staples into the control bar and through the staple that's already in the slat. This one is used to put the staples in the slats, and this one will get used vertically to drill holes in the ends of the slats. And there's yet another one over here at the drill press to drill the holes in the stiles. So if you'd like to build your own Plantation shutters, a measure drawing will be available with the materials list, including all the information to build these jigs, which will guide you along the way. Now, I want to start by working on the stiles. Here's my stock. It's poplar. We like poplar for painted projects. It takes paint well, and it's very stable. It's the right width and the right thickness, but the pieces are a little long, so let's trim them to length. Now, before we use any power tools, let's talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. Now I'm going to make a quick cut to square up one end, then slide it down to my stop block and cut it to length. Let's take a look at our prototype. If I pull the slats open, you get a better look at the inside edge of these stiles. It's a little bit of a reveal there. And if you look more closely at it on this additional stile that I've made, you see that it's a square edge and then a 5/32 round over. I can make that detail at the router table. Here I have the 5/32 router bit set up and a feather board to hold the stock tight to the table. The important thing is to run the stock on its flat face, not on edge. I found out that the hard way when I built the prototype. Let me show you a sample of the joint where we're going to connect the rails and stiles. Each stile will have a mortise. Later we'll be making tenons on some rails that will fit into those mortises. Now to make the mortises, I'm going to use my dedicated mortiser. I've set it up with a 3/8 inch square chisel. Inside there's a drill bit. The drill bit will remove most of the material and the chisel will square it up. Take a look at this setup. If I take my sample tenon and slide it into the mortise that I've just made, you can see that the shoulder of the rail is not going to meet this line. There's actually a gap there. So what I want to do is remove material around this mortise flush to that shoulder. The first step is to make a shoulder cut right here. So I've ganged the pieces together and I'll make that cut at the table saw. I've set up a stop block to locate the cut, and I've raised the blade just the right amount. Now I want to remove the rest of the material. So I've set up this straight cutting bit at the router table. I'll bring it in and by eye stop just short of that kerf cut. The rest of the material I'll remove with a chisel. And a chisel cleans it up. Let's talk about the mechanism that allows the shutters to open and close. It starts with these little nylon pins, and we'll tell you in the plan where you can acquire those. The stiles require a hole for the fat end of the pin, and the slats require a small hole to slip over the small end of the pin. Now I don't want them to be too loose or too tight. If they're too loose, they may not stay open. If they're too tight, they'll put a lot of stress on the control bar. The hole in the end of the slat is a 9/64 hole. That's perfect. But when I drilled the holes in the stiles, I found that a 1/4 inch was too big and 15/64 was too small. But I found just the right bit, and it's this one. It's called a lettered bit, and it's size B. It's perfect. You can find these lettered bits either on the internet or at an industrial supply house. Now here's one of the first jigs that we're going to use. And the plan will show how to build this. It's basically a fence at 90 degrees. And then I built this little indexing jig. If you look underneath it, you can see that there's one of the shutter pins. I've made a couple notches in the pieces so that it'll lock onto the fence. The distance from the center of that pin to the center of the drill bit is 2 inches, exactly what I want. And here's how it works. What I'm going to do is take my stock, drill the first hole. It's also centered on the thickness. Slide it over, drop that indexing pin in. As you can see, it lines right up with the next layout line. Now the layout lines are a bit of belt and suspenders. I just want to make sure I stay true to those as I drill all the holes. Now is a good time to deal with the mortises necessary for the hinges. Now normally when I make a mortise, I make it just deep enough so that the hinge will be flush with the edge of the wood. But you notice here I've made an extra deep mortise. It's deep enough to accommodate the hinge, yet it sticks out about 1/16 of an inch, and that'll be the gap between the shutter and the extension jamb of my window. No mortises in the extension jambs. Now to make those, we have this jig. It has cutouts for all 3 hinges that are going to go on each shutter. And on the underside, I have 2 cleats which will hold the stile in place. And I just line it up on the end, flip it back over, make sure it's flush, and clamp it to my table. Now to make the mortise, I'm going to use my router, which is equipped with a 1/2 inch straight cutting bit and a collar. The collar is going to ride around the inside of that notch, and the bit will do the work. And now a chisel to clean up the corners. I want to show you how these shutters meet in the center. Rather than just having a butt joint, I decided to rabbet each of the shutters so that I have a shiplap joint. And I think it's a much cleaner detail. So here I've set up my stacked dado with a featherboard to keep the stock tight to the table, so I'll run the stiles through. With the stiles complete, I'm now ready to start working on the rails. And I want to form a tenon on each end of all the rails. The first cut is this shoulder cut. So I've set up a stop block to control the length of the tenon, and I've set the blade to just the right height. Now I'm set up for a nibbling operation. I've raised the blade slightly. I start at the end of the piece, and using my left hand, I keep moving it over at each pass until I hit the stop block. To complete the tenons, I need to make the cheek cuts. And the best tool for that is my tenoning jig, because that holds the piece safely in a vertical position as I run it through the saw. Now that the tenons are formed on the rails, I want to make some rabbets. And they're actually curved rabbets. And you can see it's offset. This one's wider than this one. If I take my sample and place it into the stile, and then take one of my slats, the deep rabbet will allow the slat to close all the way. They'll all butt up tight to one another, sealing out the light totally. When I turn the slat all the way around so it's in this position, they close most of the way. Now we'll make the rabbets over at the router table. To make those rabbets, I've installed a 1/2-inch round nose bit in the router. I've set the fence so that it'll remove 1/4 inch material and at the height that I want. Now I've simply lowered the bit to give me the narrow side, the narrow rabbet. One more detail. If I slide one of the rails in place, it's not fitting tight to the stile because I need to remove a little bit of the material left after making the rabbets. We'll do that at the table saw. Okay, let's try it now. That's what it should look like. The next detail I want to take care of is in the rails where there's this recess into which the control bar sets when the shutter is closed. So over here I have a very simple jig like the one for the hinges with a notch cut out of it. Here's the piece underneath. It's clamped in place. Using the same router bit and collar I did for the mortising, we'll cut out that piece. That's all there is to it. Here's some stock for the slats. It's basswood. And basswood is a good choice because it's very light and it's very stable. It'll also take paint well. I've made the pieces 1/2 inch thick and 2 1/4 inches wide, and I want to convert these into this profile. Now to do that, I'm going to use my molding machine. I sent up to the manufacturer a drawing of what I was trying to make, and they ground me a couple knives, special knives for my molding machine. And there it is, one of the 2 knives which are bolted to the cutter head. And you can see with this piece of stock, if I run it through, it does one side, flip it over, run it through again, and it completes the slat. Now the trick is to have some kind of a guide system to guide the stock directly under that cutter. So what I did is made a jig, a piece of 1/4 inch plywood, 2 side guides perfectly aligned with the cutter, and notched out for my in-feed and out-feed rollers. Now I'll set the height and we'll be ready to run some stock. Well, that takes care of the first pass. For the second pass, I made another jig, and I've installed some little wedges that account for the material that I removed. Now I can machine the other side once this is installed. Well, one more thing before I leave tonight. I want to do a little priming. I want to prime any material that will be hard to reach once the shutters are assembled, as well as some of this stock for the slats. I'm using a high volume, low pressure sprayer, and this controls how much paint I put on and has very little overspray. Now tomorrow I'll show you how to drill holes in the ends of the slats, put the mechanism together, we'll assemble some shutters, and we'll put on the final coats of paint. Well, good morning. I'm getting started today by making the control bars, which will operate the louvers. It's 3/8 of an inch thick stock, so what I like to do is take a wide board and round over each edge. If I were to rip the piece first, it would be unsafe to push it through the router. I'm simply using a 1/4 inch bit. Now that I've rounded the edges, we'll rip the strips. With the bar cut to length, I want to round over each end. Same bit, except now I'm going to use a miter gauge to guide the piece. Well, it's back to the louvers now. The length of the louver is critical. If they're too long, the louver won't work very well. And if they're too short, it'll be unsightly along the edge. So now that I've calculated the length exactly and cut the louvers, now I want to drill the holes for the pivot pins. So over here at the drill press, I've tipped the table 90 degrees. It's in a vertical position parallel with the bit. I've taken the jig that I used to make the louvers, the second pass of the louvers, and clamped it to the table. That'll allow me to hold the piece. I've aligned it perfectly so the bit is straight down in this direction, adjusted it this way, and now we're ready to drill the holes. Now the size of the hole is 9/64, which matches the small side of the pin, and it's a little deeper than the length of the pin, and it's just snug. That's it. I want to show you the mechanism for operating the louvers. Each louver has a staple at its center, and corresponding to that is a staple in the control bar that goes through it, all equally spaced, and that makes it operate. First thing I want to do is put the staples in the slats. Not as easy as you might think. First, I built this jig to hold the slat on edge. Then I installed a stop so that the staple will be centered. Now to support the stapler, I took my stapler, removed the staples, and projected the plunger. Then I measured the distance from the end of the plunger to the bottom of the stapler. Built this bed so that when the stapler is in position, it's exactly 1/4 of an inch above the slat, the end of that plunger. Now I'm going to shoot 1-inch staples in each slat. Perfect every time. Now the system works pretty well. I've shot about 80 slats so far, and only one staple blew through the side. Now I have to attach these slats to the control bar, and the trick is to get a staple to go through the one that's already in the slat into the control bar. So another jig. A slot here for the control bar and a center line which will line up with the stapler. I've undercut the support under the stapler so I can slide in a slat which sits up against the stop right there. Now I can bring in the stapler, and I've switched to 5/8 inch staples. You shoot it, slide it down, put another slat in place, line it up with the center mark, shoot it, and so forth down the line. As with all these operations, if you're building multiple shutters, set up the jigs once and run all your pieces. Well, now we're ready for some assembly, and I found it's best to clamp one of the stiles in place and then take these sub-assemblies of slats and set them in. You probably noticed that I took the time to prime the ends of all the slats. It's a lot easier to do it before it's assembled. Okay, now I'm ready for the other rail, and I get it started on the tenons first. Just get it in position. And this is where having the right size hole for those louvers is really important. If they were too tight, it'd be very difficult to get in. And if they were too loose, the pieces would just flop around when I'm trying to line them up. Another thing that makes this project accessible are these pins. They're inexpensive and they work great. Okay, there's the right-hand shutter. Let's make the other one. Okay, now once the glue dried on that glue up, I sanded all the joints smooth and then primed any raw wood surfaces. Then I gave it a light sanding, and now I'm ready for the final finish coat, which will be a low luster enamel. And what I've found is it's better to put on 2 thin coats than try to lay on 1 heavy coat. Of course, if you don't have a sprayer, you could always paint this by hand. It'll just take a little longer. Okay, that takes care of that one. Why don't you come in and take a closer look? I think it looks pretty good. Now, what I like about spraying is that I can put on a nice thin coat. I don't see any drips anywhere. And when this dries, it'll have an absolutely smooth finish, almost like it was put on in the factory. Well, here's the room that I want to install the shutters in. And you might recall from an earlier program that we built a library system that consisted of these bookcases with adjustable shelves and this window seat. I finally got it painted, and it was time for window treatments. So here's the first set of shutters I built installed, and I really like them. They operate very well, they look great, and I'm sure glad that I did all the painting in the workshop. Now, there are a couple tricks to installing them. The first thing that I did was to put the hinges on the shutter. And you might recall that I made the mortise extra deep so that when the hinge is closed, it's almost flush with the edge of the shutter. Therefore, I don't need any mortises in this extension jamb. The next thing I want to do is hold the shutter in the right position. So I have this shim on the window stool. I'm going to set the shutter up on that. And then I'm going to bring the hinge into the extension jamb and take this shim, put it up against that stop, and that'll space it just right. I'll drill a pilot hole first and then install a screw. Okay, that's the top one. Now I move the spacer down below, drill and install another screw. Okay, let's see how I did. That closes nicely. Now what I'm looking for is a nice even margin across the top and down the side. And that looks pretty good. All right, and a latch in the middle. No need for any magnetic catches. This will hold them closed. These turned out really well. I don't know if I'd go through this much trouble to build just one set, but for 3 or 4, once you build the jigs, it's a piece of cake. Now let me show you what we're going to build next time. We call these our workshop helpers, 3 indispensable accessories for your workshop. This is the first, a roll-around stock cart. You load your stock for a project on this, and it follows you as you go from the table saw to the joiner to the bandsaw, all through the process. The second is a tool stand on a mobile base on which you can set a variety of your different benchtop tools. And finally, something we've been meaning to build for quite some time, an adjustable roller stand meant for the table saw, but this can be used at the drill press, the bandsaw, and even the radio. We'll build all of these next time right here in the new Yankee workshop.
If you've enjoyed this new Yankee project, you may want to try some of the others. There are projects meant for the workshop, the garden, the kitchen, and many more. So whether you're a fan of shaker style, or colonial, arts and crafts, or Chippendale, there may be a Norm project you'd like to build. Whether it's a clock or a gazebo, a picnic bench or a Windsor chair, a child's toy or a sailboat, visit the New Yankee website at www.newyankee.com for a complete listing.